Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Cynthia Needham. I'm an assistant managing editor at the Boston Globe, and I'm joined today by best-selling author Ben Mezrich. As many of you know, Ben has written books like Bringing Down the House, The Accidental Billionaires, which was turned into the movie The Social Network. He's also written the book Bitcoin Billionaires, which is coming out in paperback later this summer. And he's a writer on the show Billions. So Ben has a lot going on. But you all are here today to hear him as author of The Mechanic, which was the serialized novella that we ran in the pages and online in the Boston Globe recently. So Ben, it's a pleasure to sit down with you. Welcome.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting to be able to do this, and I'm so happy that people gravitate toward it and read it, and it's just very, very cool.
That's great. Well, I have to say, this project came about when some editors at the Globe sat down towards the beginning of the quarantine and said, how do we give our readers a little bit of a distraction from the sort of onslaught of news that we're getting every day? And when Brian McGrory, the editor of the paper, suggested the notion of potentially a short book that would run in the Globe, I think my reaction was candidly, that sounds like a great idea, but who the heck can write a short book in such a brief amount of time, much less something that any of us would want to read? And the answer, as we all now know, is of course Ben. When he first sent the first installment of this book, I was just, I have to say, astounded, because it wasn't just a good read that kept my attention. It's a really complex, nuanced, layered plot that just keeps adding more and more as you go. So I'm excited to talk about it today. I know our readers are as well. They've submitted lots of questions. Just a quick note on how this is going to work. As you guys all know, Zoom things can be a little buggy, so I apologize if we go in and out. I'm hoping we are in more than out. Lots of you submitted questions, but as you can see, there's a question and answer function down in the bottom of your screen. That's going to allow you to jump in and ask any questions in the next half hour or so. So please do, and I'll scan through them from time to time and pull out some to ask of Ben. So let's jump in. Tell us, for starters, as I mentioned, how you managed to do this in such a short amount of time. It's a huge plot, and I think you did it pretty quickly. So tell us a little bit about the process from when Brian first called you to when those first pages rolled out.
Sure. Yeah, so basically, Brian McGrory, had this idea, and him and Linda reached out to me, and at first I was terrified, the idea of writing a book this quickly. Something, I had read people had done blog type things like this, but I only wanted to do it if I could do a fully realized, like Da Vinci Code style, complex thriller. And so I sat down and thought about it, and it kind of all came to me, this whole crazy plot and everything about it. So I ended up writing it in a very short period of time, a couple of weeks, which is insane. But I was thrilled to be able to do something like this as a diversion for other people and a diversion for myself, because I was caught up in this craziness as well. And this, I didn't check my temperature for a whole 2 weeks. So it ended up being a very positive thing for me. Am I coming in okay? I can't tell. Is the Zooming about
it's going in and out, but we can hear your audio,
right.
So that's great. Just get some freeze frames, but that's all right. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? I mean, right. I know the writing process must be super intense on any day, but in quarantine, what was it like? Did you sit down and write for a certain number of hours every day? Did you do it in spurts?
Yeah, so I'm a very fast writer as usual. My book, Bringing Down the House, for instance, which was turned into the movie 21, I wrote that book in like 3 weeks. So I've always been an incredibly quick writer. I try and write 6,000 words a day, which I don't recommend for anybody. But I basically, for this project, it was intense research for a few days to figure out the plot line. So before we started publishing it, I had figured out sort of the outline, the plot, where I wanted the characters to go. I really knew, and this is kind of a spoiler, but I'm hoping most of these people have read it. I wanted to link Paul Revere and the Gardner theft in some really wild way. always been obsessed with both of those things. So finding those connections was a lot of research, but the writing was get up and write, from morning until lunch, and then at night do a lot of plotting and craziness. But I was writing every morning. I think I was trying to be like a newspaper person, writing every day. But I've always been a very quick writer.
So I'm glad you brought up the plot, because that's a huge number of questions came in about how you put this plot together. One of them I really liked, because I think the person put it really succinctly, was there's so many, this isn't just one plot. There are layers upon layers there's the historical thriller and the Gardner Heist and the whodunit and the incredible science angle. What inspired you to weave together what this one reader called improbable bedfellows in this way?
Yeah, I mean, it's very improbable. I love National Treasure, for instance. We've all seen the National Treasure movie, and I've always been intrigued by secrets that we walk by every day. The idea that there's something going on beyond that door that we never really see the inside of. And so a lot of my books are about uncovering these weird worlds that really exist. So for me, the idea that Paul Revere is an alchemist, that's based in reality. Paul Revere probably was an alchemist, or almost definitely was. He was a metallurgist. He was a copper genius. He was the only person in the Americas who knew how to make sheets of copper that could be folded. And so when you put together those two facts, that he was obsessed with alchemy and that he actually was the best metal worker in the world at the time, you get into a weird place. And then you start to sort of look at what happens around that time period. And that's where you sort of get to this Napoleonic, eagle, because this really was made by a bronze worker at that period in time. And bronze is, as we know, copper, basically. So all of these links kind of come together. Maybe you have to be crazy like me to see them. I'm not really a conspiracy believer. Most conspiracies I don't believe in, but every now and then, you figure something out and you're like, wait a minute, that actually kind of works. So for this, I really wanted to layer in a lot of complexity, but in a very short, I only had 14 days. So it wasn't like I could write 5 chapters about alchemy. If I were to extend this book out, we would get more about Paul Revere and Ben Franklin and John Hancock, who were all alchemists, by the way, and figure out what it was. They were creating a new country and a revolution and fighting the British. They were also trying to turn lead into gold. And I think that there's a real cool juxtaposition there. So that's what informs a lot of that stuff.
On the issue of the colonial figures, were you somebody who was a big history buff? Was that something, did you know a lot about Paul Revere and Ben Franklin, or did you find yourself sort of digging deep to do quick research on them?
So I had to do all the research, basically. I mean, I knew what basically we all know about Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride, but I discovered early on that that's not how it actually took place. That, it was not what it seemed. The trunk, the Hancock trunk is all real and everything like that. So I had done a fair amount of research onto sort of that. Most of it was new research. I knew a bit about alchemy. I knew a bit about Paul Revere just not being who we thought he was. The Tea Party stuff I actually kind of knew. This was all about smugglers. That the whole Boston Tea Party in a lot of ways was about Hancock protecting his business interests, and everything else was not. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, yeah.
I think one of my favorite plot points was that you sort of, I guess, turned on its head what we all think we know about the Gardner Heist, which is the notion that the theft was to get the very valuable paintings, and that these two other things, the finial and the goo, were the afterthoughts. And you present quite the opposite. I know you've said in the past that you were a bit of a student of that heist, and I'm just sort of curious, is that a theory you've always had, something you've been playing with in your head, or was that kind of concocted just for this slot?
Okay, this gets really weird, just so you know. So years ago, I was contacted by someone who wanted to tell me what really happened at the Gardner Heist. And this is I'm a writer. People pitch me stories all the time. And this was one of these late night phone calls where someone's like, I want to connect you with someone who was involved in the Gardner Heist. So late at night, it was like 2 a.m, this person calls me from a cell phone. And the call comes in and says, I was the one who robbed the Gardner Museum. I'm not making this up. And I know where all the paintings are. I'm on parole right now in California, but I'm going to break my parole. I'm going to come to Boston and I'll meet you in an alley in South Boston. And at that point, I chickened out of going to the alley in South Boston. But the guy told me just enough to make me interested in the Gardner theft. And this was a guy who had been in jail for a very similar theft. So I did become obsessed with the Gardner theft very early on. And I believe it was a paid-to-order robbery. Somebody ordered these specific paintings and probably the other 2 items as well, because they were not the most valuable things in the museum. They would leave behind a Michelangelo and take, another painting. And there was no reason to take this golden eagle. The golden eagle was difficult to take. It was on the top of a flag. It was screwed in and really worthless, or pretty close to worthless compared to the art. So you left behind a $50 million painting to take a $50,000 golden eagle that you had to climb up a wall to get. And that's weird. So it's inconsistencies like that that really intrigue me. I never cracked the Gardner case, and nobody else has yet. I personally believe that those paintings are sitting in a warehouse because whoever stole them died. So that all I think is real. Linking it to Paul Revere is where we get interesting, but I definitely think most of that stuff is probably correct.
Did the inspiration for this book start with one of these plot points, with the Gardner, you said, I want to write about the Gardner, I want to write about Paul Revere, or did they all kind of blossom together?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I didn't start with the Gardner. I started with a card counter at the Encore. So my plot line really started with Haley and the idea that, because that's my wheelhouse, bringing down the house, someone beating the game of blackjack, a math whiz. So I started with her, and I was thinking, okay, what can we get her involved with? And what's this vast thriller? I knew I wanted to go back in American history, and I knew I wanted it all to be Boston-centric. Because I'm a Bostonian, I love Boston, and the whole idea of this is that it's a hometown national treasure. And when you look at Boston, Revere springs to mind almost immediately. So that's where I started. The Gardner part was probably less relevant. I knew that I wanted to connect it through this thief. And what really intrigued me was, how do you connect Paul Revere to the Gardner theft? And why were these 2 extra items stolen? If I'd used the Chinese goo or whatever, it would have been a very different book. But I think that it really works in a lot of ways when you go down the Freedom Trail, because people know these places, they know this history, but there's more to it. Revere was not who we thought he was. John Hancock was a smuggler and the wealthiest man in Boston. Sam Adams was a rabble-rouser and a troublemaker. George Washington was against the Boston Tea Party. Most people at the time thought the people who did the Boston Tea Party were criminals. Not the English, the Americans thought that. So when you start to look at this, and it's not really alternate history, it's really history, it starts to really mess with your head.
It brings me to a good question that somebody, or that I wanted to bring up. You wrote a note to Globe readers to let them know a little bit about why you wrote this. And I was intrigued by one line in it that I just wanted to read back quickly. You said, I only wanted to do this if I could come up with a fully realized thriller, something with twists and turns that felt like it was based in real history, even when it wasn't. Can you talk a little bit about that wasn't side of things, the historical liberties that you took, and more to the point, what was pure fiction and what was based on historical evidence of one sort or another?
Sure. With my books, it's never clear what's nonfiction and what's fiction. If you ask certain reviewers, all my books are mostly fiction. But the reality is, the things that you think are true and the things that you think are not true are usually in reverse. Almost everything that I write about Revere is true. I would say the majority of the facts about the Gardner theft are true. You know, Bobby Donati was probably involved. He probably was the one who pulled it off. He did die and stuffed in the trunk of his car, you know, right afterwards or shortly afterwards. You know, they really do have this reward for the Gardner. All of the Gardner stuff is mostly true. Yeah, the history is where I start to veer off a little bit. I think is more in the crazy science of alchemy. You know, could you really turn lead into gold using a bell, right? But all of the science also is based in real stuff. So my father is an engineer and a scientist, held many patents in ultrasound and holograms, and so he became my scientific advisor on this. And you really can affect things with sound. You know, they do use sound to burn tumors. You know, sound can break glass, right? So we're not really all entirely knowledgeable of what sound waves really are and how they can affect material. But that was an interesting route to go down. But in terms of the history, you know, I think the stuff about the Constitution, I put enough history in there that's real about that vote and about the cannons and about things like that, you know, most of the way. I would say most of the history is correct. It's where we get into the alternate stuff, like the French bronze maker, whether he ever worked for Revere or not, you know, that might be my own little thing. But whether, you know, there's the Book of Bells, you know, Revere was obsessed with bells. He made 300 bells. Towards the end of his life, he was just making bell after bell after bell. And bells are complicated. There's a lot of science to the tone, and he really did call, you know, the bell in King's Chapel the sweetest bell he ever made. He was obsessed with that bell. All of that's real. So Revere being a bell maker, that was all true. Was there a bell after the bell that was made in King's Chapel? I mean, that's where we start getting into this world.
I confess, when my husband and I were reading this, we were madly Googling, you know, random historical facts to try to figure out, wait, now, was that true? Did that ever happen? So it was kind of a fun way to do that. Talk about alchemy a little bit. It's not just science, it's really complicated science. What made you think in such a short piece of writing that you could explain alchemy and explain the secret to alchemy? Why that particular piece of chemistry?
Yeah, so alchemy is amazing when you look into it, because really it was the forerunner to chemistry. Way back in the Middle Ages and even before that in ancient Egypt, people were obsessed with the idea of transmuting metals to another metal. But it wasn't just lead to gold. This was supposed to give you immortality, power over the real world. And chemistry actually came from this. So this is kind of intriguing to me. And the other part that's very intriguing is alchemists used to be murdered. It was illegal in most places. You could be locked up. And so that's why they created all these secret symbols that end up informing the Freemasons. All of that is real. And I'm always interested in the idea of a science you're not allowed to do. You know, I wrote a book about UFOs, and I know it always sounds crazy when you say UFOs, but you're not allowed to talk about UFOs if you're a scientist. Because if you do, you're crazy. And that's what intrigues me about it. If there's an area of science you're not allowed to study, I want to look at it. Because why aren't you allowed to study it? Why aren't people looking at alchemy? I mean, obviously it doesn't work, and yet it does. A nuclear reactor, in the right circumstances, could turn lead into gold. So these people, thousands of years ago, were not wrong. You know, you could actually change lead into gold. What seems completely fantasy is now not fantasy, just takes an enormous amount of energy and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But so the ideas behind alchemy were actually not wrong. But the fact that it was kept in the secret, you had to use symbols, the eagle. I mean, all of these symbols are real. And the alchemists used to hide their work in all this symbology. So yeah, I mean, the hard part of a book like this is you don't want to do something that Dan Brown has already done or Harry Potter has already done, right? The Philosopher's Stone. So, you know, you have to find your own ground there. And I knew in a short form, it would be very hard to describe what I was talking about in length. You know, it had to be fast. But I kind of like that. You know, I don't want to get bogged down in the crazy world of alchemy necessarily in a thriller that's, you know, running around Boston. So I think that worked in a big way. But yeah, I'm fascinated by alchemy. You know, I could play with that all day long, trying to figure out what's real and what's not. You know, why was it illegal to attempt to change lead into gold in many cultures? So, you know, that's something you look into as a writer and get interested in.
Interesting. So you mentioned the Constitution, we've talked about alchemy, all of which leads us to the end. And I have to say, we got a couple hundred questions ahead of time, and I would say the vast majority of them had to do with what's going on here, what's happening next. So let's talk about the end for a second. If anybody who's watching has not read the end, I would say maybe tune out and we'll send you a recording because we'll definitely have some spoilers here. So the ending, there's a lot going on. You could say there are two cliffhangers. The big question, is this headed for a sequel? I'm gonna guess yes, but tell us if we're wrong.
Yeah, so I am writing a sequel. I'm actually in the midst of it right now. I always saw this as a series of books like The Da Vinci Code or National Treasure. So my endings are often frustrating for people, not just in this book, but many of my books. Some people love the ending and some people are probably like, tell me more now. I wanted to leave it a little bit open. I think this story does end here in some ways. You know, Haley and Nick got to the end. The bell wasn't there, but there was something there that leads you to the next bell, which may be the real bell. And we start there. I am writing a book, the sequel. I don't have a title yet, but it involves Ben Franklin and goes from there. And I could leave you, I don't know how much I want to leave you with. I think what's intriguing to me is that the story isn't over, even though I feel like there's closure to some extent, but I left an opening into where we go next. The family is still trying to procure this device, and Haley is now the puzzle solver that she is. She's not going to give up on trying to solve it. And we have our FBI agent who survives, right? And he now is holding this gold box, which has in it the clapper from the Liberty Bell. Now that gets intriguing when you look at it because the Liberty Bell actually would have been unlikely that it was made by Revere unless there was some sort of switcheroo at some point. Also, the Liberty Bell itself is full of interesting history because, you know, the story is that it was rung at the Constitution signing, you know, American independence, which is all not true. It was not rung then. Ben Franklin, we get into really intriguing stuff with him. The experiment with the kite probably never happened the way he said it happened, because had Ben Franklin done the experiment the way he said he did, he would be dead. So that electricity going through that key would have killed him. Ben Franklin was very much an alchemist, beyond anyone else. He was probably the greatest alchemist of his time and a scientist. So there's a lot of openings for book 2. So I am definitely writing a sequel. I don't know if it'll be in the Globe. Well, you know, I don't know if this is a moment in history because of the time we're living in, or if this is something newspapers will do more of. I loved doing it. I think I'm an author suited to write quickly, and I love doing it. But yes, there will be a story. Book 2 is going to come, and I'm in the process right now of writing it. So we'll see how it goes.
That's great. I want to ask you more about the experience of writing for a newspaper, but I have so many questions about the end that I just got to go back to that for a second here. So I was going to start with Haley, but you jumped over to Ben Franklin. So maybe we can start there as a sort of trying to make our way through the ending and what was happening there. So in the kind of the second ending, after we're off the Constitution, we're on the other dock, you have Mr. Arthur and Kurt with the picture of the engraving. And so the question I had here, and the number of people have, is tell us about the engraving. Is that something that they just came across, or are we to assume that they've had that in their possession for some time, which is part of why they're on this chase? What's happening there?
So not to give too much of away, but the family is a much bigger thing than Mr. Arthur. Let's put it that way. It's a fairly vast organization that has been attempting to get to the source, I guess we could call it the Philosopher's Stone if we want, although that's so Harry Potter now. But the idea is that there is a device, which in my mind is really a mathematical calculation. It's a mathematical and in this book, it was told through sound waves. But that's not necessarily the only answer. So where Revere failed, Ben Franklin took the experiment farther. While Revere was working with sound, Ben Franklin was working with electricity, and which are very related things. But anyways, so this engraving was not something that had informed this attempt to get the Philosopher's Stone, but now informs the next attempt. This attempt essentially failed. So the family failed in getting hold of what they were trying to get a hold of, but they have not, now they're working on, Kurt is now going to take Patricia's role in trying to bring down the second one.
So we can assume that they've been on the trail of this since the Gardner paintings were stolen, yes?
I mean, if, you know, the idea is that they commissioned the Gardner theft to get the eagle, not knowing that it was involved with sound waves. They didn't know what the eagle was.
They didn't? Okay, that clears something up for us.
They knew the eagle contained the mathematical equation for alchemy. They didn't know how, they didn't know how they would read the eagle, but they wanted the eagle. They knew it was in the museum, so they commissioned Donati to go rob the museum. By the way, I do believe Donati was commissioned to rob the museum by a very wealthy financier who I think I know who it was, actually. I think I know who commissioned the Gardner theft, but I'm not going to tell you. But I do think I know.
I'd be a bad journalist if I didn't say, who is that?
And then this person late at night who called me, who gave me enough evidence to make me believe that they were involved, did tell me who had commissioned the theft. But anyways, that's a whole separate story. The point is that
wait, let me ask you one other question about that.
Yeah.
Just one other question.
Yeah.
Why would a financier want the Gardner paintings beyond the monetary value of them? Is there something else going on there in your belief?
Yeah. So a lot of wealthy, this actually happens all the time, and I've actually written about this somewhere. I don't even remember where. Very wealthy billionaires. They don't care about money that much anymore because they have it. The way they measure themselves against their friends is the unique things that they have. You know, the things that you can't just buy. And that's an intriguing thing about, you know, the 0.0001%. So many, I'm not going to, you know, name many, but there are billionaires who have things they call vaults. And what a vault is it's an underground secret art gallery. In Japan, I had been to one. This very wealthy billionaire in the basement of his mansion had incredible works of art in there. I didn't ask where they came from or the story behind that. So it is not unusual for very wealthy people to commission thefts. It happens in real life. So what's interesting about the Gardner theft is the specific paintings that were stolen. If you were just trying to steal the most valuable paintings in there, it wouldn't have been those. So somebody wanted those specific paintings. It's likely that the eagle was something somebody wanted for some reason, had nothing to do with its value. But the paintings themselves, certainly someone wanted them because of the rarity, because they like that particular painting. So I think a wealthy person did commission that theft. The idea that it was just a theft to get someone out of jail, which is the leading theory, why those paintings? You know, why? That seems very random. It could be part of it, but it's not the entire answer. So that's where I come up to that. So I do think that there was I do think it was a commission theft.
Okay, interesting. I want to hear more about that. Maybe we can have a panel part 2 so Ben can tell us more about his theory of where the Gardner paintings are now. So let's go back for a second to the other ending, which is the Haley ending. We're to assume that in the end, she does not actually run, right? I mean, I feel like that's what we're left with, although I suppose you could read it like maybe it was a momentary thought and then she took off.
Yes, so Haley's going to be done running. I think she's really into this, figuring this out. There's obviously something going on between her and Nick now, which in the span of 2 weeks, I couldn't really develop, you know. There's thrillers where like they're in the middle of getting shot at and then they're like making out in the corner. Always feel a little forced, but I feel like in this respect, there's a developing intrigue there going on. I think that she is definitely she is definitely figuring out that it's time to stop running. She's built this whole fake for her life for herself, you know, at MIT, paying her way through card counting and little schemes. But I think she really wants to stop running, but she is going to go on the trail of she's not done with the story. So she needs to know more. You know, she's the one who does puzzles that have no pictures on them. Yeah, I think that she's going to keep going in that respect. Yeah.
It's actually one of the details that really stuck with me from the story. It's not intricate to the plot, but the idea of just this white puzzle, and do those really exist? I've never seen one, but it certainly seems to tell a lot.
They do. Yeah, they do exist. I read somewhere that Sheryl Sandberg might do that. I don't know if that's really true or not, but I had read somewhere that she did it. I have a sister-in-law who's very puzzle obsessed, who sends us puzzles sometimes that are really crazy, that are basically one color. And you sit at them and you're like, oh my God, this is gonna drive me insane. But there are people who do puzzles without pictures on them. And it's just you know, not that it's just time consuming, but it's just, you have to have a certain mind. You have to have a certain mind to enjoy that, you know? But some people do. Some people love solving puzzles, and the harder they are, the better. I just did a 3,000 piece puzzle in my quarantine state, but it was SpongeBob SquarePants' Bikini Bottom, so there was a lot of color on it. But I love puzzles and I love doing puzzles. I'm not as good at them as Haley is, but yeah.
I did notice that Haley's, I thought it was an interesting plot point that the whole reason she ends up leaving her foster family is because of this incident with the fire, which also involves sort of a chemical reaction, if you're to believe what they think. Why do that? Is it to give her a basis in chemistry? Is there something that's going to play out later on in one of the sequels?
Yeah, so I always wanted her, you know, why is she so good at math and science? You know, I always knew that she came from a foster situation, a really hard background, that she really, you know, rough and tumble, that she invented this whole character for herself. And, you know, she wasn't from a world of anything. She didn't have any family really. But I like the idea that her foster father was a scientist who kind of lost his way or lost it. Crystal radios is something I've always been kind of intrigued by. And I think pyrite is fascinating. The whole idea that, you know, you can get, again, it goes back to alchemy, but that, you know, you can get fire from something hitting the air, these sort of chemical reactions. There's secrets out there, you know, as human beings, we discover these secrets daily. To me, that's really, really cool. I could never be a scientist for a lot of reasons. My mind doesn't work well. I've never actually looked into a microscope and seen anything. I don't know if it's my eyes or the fact that I wear glasses. My dad is a scientist. Both my brothers are in science or doctors. My wife is a scientist. I love science. I'm just horrible at it. So for my way of getting into science is following scientists around. I wrote a book called Woolly a while back about George Church and you know, them trying to make a woolly mammoth, right? And why I wrote that book was I really believe scientists are the people who are really saving us every day, discovering all these things, and the world is full of secrets, right? And one of these secrets is pyrite. You know, there's secrets in chemistry, secrets in geology, secrets in every area of science. And so that's really where that comes from. It's more, you know, that the idea that you can get fire from a stone, to me is sort of central to this whole story.
One question that's come in from a bunch of people that I think keys off of this, the question, do you do most of your own research? You mentioned your dad had helped you this time around. Is that something you typically pull all these family members in, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a family business. So I do most of my own research. My wife, Tanya, I often send her off on journeys. Like I said, get me everything you can find on the Constitution, right? And so we become sort of experts in that way. I'm very into, as you as a journalist, you know, I'm very good at internet sleuthing. You know, I can sleuth very well and find things that most people can't find in very arbitrary, weird places. And I have a lot of friends in the world that I can make a phone call to. So if I want to know something specific about the FBI or about, you know, what a state trooper does on a daily basis or what, I can make a phone call to somebody. So that's one of the the great things about having written for a long time and written a lot of books in a lot of areas is you develop a very good, I guess they used to call it a Rolodex. It's not called that anymore, or whatever it's called. Yeah, so I have a lot of people I can call. I do my research. Tanya is a big help in my research. That's it. I don't have interns. I don't have office. I don't have people. I'm my only people. So yeah, there's no.
Well, especially during quarantine, we're all our own people.
Yeah, you know what's weird about this quarantine is it's not dramatically different than my regular life. I mean, I'm usually locked up for 3 to 4 months at a time. Yeah, I think it's always been the fun of these books is the research and getting inside a world you never knew before.
What would you say to those people? Because I feel like there were a few of them who felt like this ending was a little bit unsatisfying because it didn't fully wrap up. I know you hinted at this, that that's just how readers are going to feel sometimes, but what would you say to them?
Are you talking to my dad? No. No, listen, I think that this is a very solid ending for this story that was, in my mind, always meant to be a quick 2-week, let's all read together this. It's almost like a television series. It's season 1. And I think in a lot of ways, a book like this works. You know, when you get to the end of the first season of whatever your favorite show is, you're really excited about season 2. You're not finished. And that's how I always wanted people to look at this, even, in their own minds, thinking about it. Like, did Paul Revere, was he really an alchemist? I got to go Google this. It was the Liberty Bell, like putting that little hint towards the Liberty Bell. To me, I wanted everyone to go Google the Liberty Bell. That was my goal, is that a lot of people would suddenly Google the Liberty Bell because that's cool. And some people would be frustrated and go, oh, come on, I want to know what happens next. But I really feel like if I just dropped this ending on you that closed it off, to me, that's less fun than saying, wait a minute, this is not over. And I really like that sort of feeling. But I understand why that frustrates some people. I understand why at the end some people will be like, I want to see this Philosopher's Stone and I want to see lead turned into gold right in front of me. I don't want to give you that. I want you to think that this is possible and follow me as this gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I really want to do a lot of these. I love doing this. I set out when I was younger to be Michael Crichton. That was my goal. And I wanted to write techno thrillers. Then I ran into this group of MIT kids and I wrote Bringing Down the House because I was hanging out with them and I was going to Vegas every weekend and I thought, this is cool. That exploded and I suddenly became this nonfiction writer, but not by choice. I was thrown into the world of nonfiction and suddenly and then The Social Network happened. And so I became known as this nonfiction writer, but what I really wanted to write was this. I wanted to write thrillers that mix science and history, reality and crazy conspiracies in my head. And so for me, this is the beginning of something really big. And that's why when Brian, came to me and Linda, and even though I was terrified at the idea of writing something like this for such an audience, to me, this was a great opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do. And the fact that people gravitated to it was just amazing.
As we get near the end of our time, that's one question I just wanted to make sure to get in was, what was it like writing for your hometown paper in this format? And what was the reaction from readers, both new readers to you and people who have been big fans for a long time?
Yeah, so I have never gotten a response like this. I have to tell you, I've written 20 books, movies, whatever. I've gotten hundreds of emails, so many people on Twitter, a continuous stream of people coming to me who aren't normally my readers. A lot of the people who read this probably have never read, everyone's seen The Social Network, but not everyone's read my books. So it's a very different group of readers and overwhelmingly positive, which is really great to hear. I mean, every now and then, listen, I got some stuff wrong. I was writing very quickly. And people were pointing out nicely the mistakes, which is always fun. But the
Did you get wrong?
Right, but the idea is that everyone was reading this and people were finding it, and the numbers were just more and more. Each chapter would come out, and more people would read the next chapter. Like that to me is the greatest thing. I would expect it to go down with each chapter, but it's going up with each chapter. And so the idea that they're in the hometown paper part, I love the Boston Globe. I really think you guys are the best journalists in the country. Continually, the Globe has been doing really innovative stuff, and the risk of doing something like this, even though it's old world like Dickens and Twain, But in the modern era, putting a book in the newspaper, obviously you're going to ruffle a few feathers, and there's going to be people who are like, I just want the news. I just want the news. But this is a really great thing. If you still have the news, if you want to read something that's not gloom and doom and how we're all going to die when we go get a package from Amazon, you can then turn to this book, The Mechanic, and have fun. And for me, I have to say it really helped me a lot. When this all started, you know, I was caught up in the anxiety. You know, I'm a hypochondriac. I was sitting here taking my temperature 5 times a day and putting the oximeter on my finger. And, you know, for me to be able to suddenly dive into something else really saved me. And I hope that a lot of people found it fun. If a few people liked it and smiled, that was really my goal here. You know, and the fact that people gravitate to it makes me know I can keep doing this, which is something I've wanted to do. But the newspaper is amazing. I love newspapers. I love the actual paper. I know most people read it online now, but for me, getting a newspaper each morning and leafing through it, it's the best part of your day, right? And so to be a part of that, I could never be a journalist like you. I could never, you know, have someone assign an article tomorrow and have it in by tomorrow and have to have it like correct, right? That's hard. It's really, really hard. And there's such an attack on journalists right now. I mean, there's this, you know, coming from the top down, people are very crazy about attacking newspapers, which is the stupidest thing we can do to ourselves. It's so self-destructive because these are the people shining light on the things that we don't see. So it was a great honor to be able to do this for the paper.
Well, Ben, on behalf of the entire Globe, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for taking part in this project. It was great fun for all of us. We know our readers really enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing where Haley and the gang are headed next. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for joining us. The entire recording is going to be available on the Globe website, and it's going to be emailed out to anybody who is registered. So if you missed anything, you'll get it there. Thanks again. Thanks, Ben. Have a great day, everyone.
It was awesome. Thanks to everybody. I appreciate it.
Take care.